Johnny Mathis is 90 years old and lives alone in the same Hollywood Hills home that has experienced landslides and fires. His memory is rapidly deteriorating. The tunes that made him famous are hardly recognizable to him. But elderly age isn't the only factor here. His seclusion has a more sinister backstory: covert addictions, enigmatic injections from well-known physicians, and a terrible decision he made in 1956 that still plagues him. It's not what you may imagine that makes Johnny Mathis's last years so tragic. Nobody could have predicted that Johnny Mathis, who was born on September 30, 1935, in the little Texas town of Gilmer, would go on to become a music icon. Clem and Mildred, his parents, were merely attempting to make ends meet. Clem was a handyman and a chauffeur. Rich white families hired Mildred to clean their homes. However, Clem had a history. He had previously played the piano and sang on Texas vaudeville theaters. Racism slammed the door shut on his hopes. He never got over that pain. Clem saw a second chance when 3-year-old Johnny began singing My Blue Heaven. In the hopes that music would hold the secret to something greater, he started teaching his son songs from his own lost past. The family had left segregated Texas by 1940, when Johnny was 5 years old. They relocated to the Fillmore district of San Francisco as part of the Great Migration. There was hardly much in the new apartment. In a post-street basement apartment, the 7 children shared a single tiny room. However, jazz and soul were thriving in the streets beyond those barriers. The Fillmore was referred to as the West's Harlem. Clubs were releasing music all day and into night. Johnny took everything in. In order to heat their small space, he and his father chopped wood. There was a lot of rhythm in the air, but his parents were still working for wealthy white people, barely making ends meet. Then, in 1943, when Johnny was only 8 years old, a miracle occurred. Somehow, Clem was able to save $25, or around $447 in today's currency. A used upright piano was purchased with that money, but it was too big to fit through the front entrance. Clem disassembled it, moved it inside, and put it back together in their living room. All night long, Johnny sat there, wide-eyed. His entire universe revolved around the piano. Long after his parents returned home exhausted from their jobs, he continued to play. That antique piano became the starting point for a trip that would lead to the top of the music charts, and their living room was transformed into a stage. Johnny was more than just a musician, though. He was able to fly. At the George Washington High School, he could jump 6'6", 6'5", and 1/2 inches in the high jump despite only being 5. That record is still in effect. None other than the future NBA legend. Bill Russell was his fiercest opponent. They had a friendship. Together, they made the trip. Newspapers were comparing them side by side and ranking them as the best in the city by 1954. Johnny came in second. However, his jump that year was only 2 inches shy of the Olympic record, set in 1952, and just 3 centimeters shy from making the 1956 Olympic squad. It seemed like fate when the offer to test out for the Olympics arrived. However, another event also occurred that week. Columbia Records sent him a telegram inviting him to record in New York. He had to make a decision: either pursue the music in his heart or aim for Olympic gold. It wasn't an easy decision, particularly given how harsh the world was to him. Johnny has witnessed firsthand the negative aspects of racism. While growing up in Texas, whites' only indications were being turned away and treated as like he didn't belong. Furthermore, his fame did not make things better. When he was on tour in the 1950s, he heard rumors that if he went on stage in the South, someone might shoot him. He didn't postpone. To avoid being an easy target, he moved around the stage while singing Chances Are. To sing, he put everything on the line. People don't always see that aspect of his tale. The silent courage required simply to be in the spotlight. Johnny received an invitation to a Sunday jam session at the Black Hawk Jazz Club in San Francisco back in 1954. Before to the record deal, greats like Dave Brubeck and Miles Davis performed there at a smoky, tiny venue. Helen Noga, a co-owner of the club, stopped everything when Johnny, who was only 19, began to sing. She was aware of what she was listening to. That day, she became his manager. She refused to accept rejection. She continued after that. She contacted Columbia Records and persuaded George Avishon, a well-known producer, to attend his show. That took place in September of 1955. Ian had already begun drafting the telegram that would alter Johnny's life by the time he had completed his second song. He described him as extraordinary. Johnny continued to pursue his aim of becoming a teacher even after he flew to New York for his first recording session in March 1956. He was pursuing a degree in English and physical education at San Francisco State College. He even rose to the position of student body president. However, school had to take a back seat after the Columbia contract. Walking away was painful, but the music was getting louder. The Olympic tryouts came and went in that same year. Instead, Johnny remained in New York and made recordings. Though he felt in his heart that he had made the correct decision, he often pondered what would have occurred if he had jumped one final time. He spoke in a different tone. It had been molded by 6 arduous years of training, with Bay Area voice instructor Connie Cox, who began mentoring him at the age of 13. Johnny worked around her house to pay for lessons because he couldn't afford them. She taught him range, breath control, and classical technique. She provided him with the means to move his voice from rich, bass notes to nearly impossible high notes without losing tone. He became a once-in-a-generation singer as a result of his instruction. His first single, Wonderful, Wonderful, peaked at #1 on the charts in November 1956. It rose, fell, and rose once again, peaking at number 14 and being on the Billboard Top 100 for 39 weeks. However, his subsequent song, It's Not For Me to Say, which was released in February 1957, was the one that broke into the top 5. He even performed the song on the piano in the movie Lizzie. It was all occurring at once. 5 months after its premiere, Columbia boasted in full-page advertisements that Wonderful Wonderful had become a long-term hit. Then the industry was shocked by a record. Johnny's Best Hits album peaked at #1 in 1958. It spent 490 consecutive weeks, or almost 10 years, in the Billboard charts. It was the first time an album had done that. Not Sinatra, not Elvis, not anybody. More than 3 million copies were sold. It was the first greatest hits album to demonstrate to the world the potential power of that format. It was never forgotten in the music industry. However, things weren't always easy. Johnny discovered who actually controlled things in 1958, while touring important locations, including the Copacabana and Las Vegas clubs. Criminal organization. A large portion of the entertainment scene was under mob control. Additionally, Johnny was not allowed to stay at the hotels where he played, despite being the night's main attraction. He was forced to remain in the black, only areas on the other side of town. The bigotry worsened, though, when a club owner told him bluntly, "Oh no, you have to stay over in the colored section." His parents just told him to keep going. "So what?" they asked, adding, "You're here for the music." The death threats continued in the South. Someone threatened to kill him if he went on stage one evening. So he took the necessary action. Nevertheless, he never stood still and continued to sing outside. It was horrible. At times, he was unable to secure a hotel at all. In his automobile, he slept. Fear like that leaves its mark. However, Johnny remained unaffected by it. Instead, he let the music do the talking. Johnny released Heavenly in 1959. The record quickly sold 500,000 copies and was rich with symphonic brilliance. For 5 weeks, it topped the charts. For 295 weeks, it remained on the charts. It became the 7th best-selling record of the decade and the 5th best-selling album of 1959. It peaked at number 10 in the UK, under the title Ride on a Rainbow. In 1986, it sold more than 1 million copies and achieved platinum status. An odd occurrence happened one chilly December in 1958. In the midst of the American rock and roll explosion, a modest vocalist by the name of Johnny Mathis quietly issued a Christmas CD. Despite everyone's lack of expectations, the record reached number 3 on the Billboard 200 at the end of that winter. Year after year, it remained there. It sold 5 million copies by 1999. It wasn't just being listened to. As though it were a custom, they played it every Christmas. Not only did songs like Percy Faith's arrangement of Winter Wonderland sound lovely, in your living room, they were like snow falling. Because of the album's impact, a follow-up was issued in 1963, Christmas Music. For 5 years in a row, it returned year after year and peaked at number 2 on the New Christmas Albums chart. Johnny Mathis was quietly constructing an empire of string sections and sleigh bells while the Beatles were tearing up the music industry. Then, 2 months before the Beatles rocked America on Ed Sullivan, there was a January night in 1964. At the Hollywood Palace, Johnny Mathis took the stage. Hugh O'Brian hosted the third show, which included Marty Angel and Ginger Rogers as guests. Millions watched Mathis sing. This appearance was not arbitrary. For the Cooners, it was their last stand. And it was successful. Mathis was often invited back to ABC's variety show, which started to compete with CBS's Ed Sullivan Show. It demonstrated that his voice was still powerful on national television, even when rock musicians became popular. Mathis under pressure to alter or vanish by 1967. He was asked to modernize by Colia Records. Thus he took a chance. On October 23 he published Up Up and Away, after returning from Mercury Records. It was not the same. There was pop. It featured folk rock. He performed Tim Hardin's Misty Roses and covered Dr. Diddle tracks. The critics were taken aback. It was acclaimed by Billboard. The album peaked at number 19 on the R&B chart and was on the charts for 20 weeks. It demonstrated that Mathis was able to change without losing his soul. Then something happened that he had not anticipated. Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to. Mathis told a U.S. Weekly reporter in 1982, in what he thought was a private conversation. He believed it to be off the record. No, it wasn't. His entire world altered when the words appeared in the magazine. Threats of death were common, particularly from reactionary states. Concerts started to get deadly. He had to cease making public announcements about his shows. I'd had enough exposure and was worried about what came with it, he stated in an interview from 2006. Everything almost ended with that one sentence in 1982. He made a daring musical step back in 1969. He published Romeo and Juliet's love theme on July 30. It combined classical film scores with pop music. The title track reached the Hot 100, remained on Billboard's easy listening chart for 13 weeks, and sold over 1 million copies. The album peaked at number 52 and was on the LP chart for 24 weeks. Before other artists ever ventured, he was fusing different genres. In the 1970s, it encouraged others to choose a similar course. Then, in 1978, a remarkable event occurred. Mathis and Denise Williams collaborated on the song Too Much, Too Little, Too Late. His first #1 single since 1957 was this one. The gap was 21 years. The song reached the top of the R&B, Adult Contemporary, Hot 100 and even the singles chart of Record World. He hadn't had a top 10 hit since 1963. He was back now, 15 years later. In the US it went gold, and in the UK it went silver. His career wasn't merely revitalized by the duet. It was the beginning of an entirely new era of duets. With Gladys Knight, Dionne Warwick, Jane Oliver, and Natalie Cole. He took yet another artistic chance in May 1973. In just 3 days, he and Tom Bell recorded I'm Coming Home at Sigma Sound Studios. It was a message as much as music. The song's title discussed choosing genuine lives over artificial ones. Trains were imitated by the percussion and bass. Landscapes of strings drifted. Although the record only peaked at number 115 on the charts, it had a significant impact. At the 17th Annual Grammy Awards, Tom Bell took home the first ever Producer of the Year Grammy. The Spinners even made it to number 18 on the charts by covering the title tune. There was more to 1978 than duets. He published You Light Up My Life that year, and it was a huge hit. On May 20, the record became gold. Then, on July 6, just 65 days later, it became platinum. In some regions, his rendition of the title hit even sold more copies than Debbie Boone's. The album spent 24 weeks at number 9 on the Billboard charts. Since the early 1960s, it was his highest charting album. Alongside the title song, BEG's versions of How Deep Is Your Love and Emotion, as well as their #1 duet with Denise Williams, were the cause. It was the unexpected return. However, something sinister was developing behind all the achievements. Mathis was a heavy drinker in the 1970s. It was fear, not just nerves. He acknowledged that he typically drank champagne to relax before every performance. This began when a doctor gave him vitamin shots that turned out to be amphetamines in the early 1960s. He was using drugs and drink while performing 5 shows a night at venues like the Copacabana. It almost ruined him by the 1980s. Then an unforeseen event occurred. First Lady Nancy Reagan observed his drinking during a White House function. She stepped in. She made arrangements for him to receive treatment at a Maryland rehab facility run by Jesuits. Her conduct, according to Mathis, was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He and Jane Oliver appeared on the Academy Awards stage on April 9, 1979. They sang the movie Same Time Next Year's love theme, The Last Time I Felt Like This. The song had been nominated for an Oscar and a Golden Globe earlier that year. The performance was memorable even if Donna Summer's Last Dance won. There was no denying their chemistry. It resulted in a Grammy nomination and restored Mathis's reputation. The song, which connected music, movies, and unfiltered emotion, was eventually featured on his album, The Best Days of My Life. He shocked his admirers once more in 1982. He collaborated with Diane Warwick on the Friends and Love album. It has a strong R&B influence and was released in April. The gamble paid off, but some fans were perplexed. For 13 weeks, the title tune remained at number 38 on the Hot 100. It gave his music fresh vitality and peaked at number 33 on the Soul Albums chart. It even had string arrangements at Capitol Studios and was recorded in California. Mathis was demonstrating once more that he was not a product of a single genre. However, not all of the experiments were successful. He released an electronic synthesizer, A Special Part of Me, in 1984. It was unpopular with critics. It remained on the charts for 19 weeks, peaking at number 157 on Billboard. Nevertheless, almost 500,000 copies were sold. His duet with Denise Williams on Love, Won't Let Me Wait, which peaked at number 14 on Adult Contemporary and number 32 on the R&B chart, was one of the highlights. Sunset Sound Studios handled the album's mixing, and the Mastering Lab handled its mastering. The UK was more accepting, but the US didn't totally adopt it. There, it hit number 45. The headline that nearly put a stop to it then appeared. His comment about homosexuality in that same 1982 US Magazine article was not only provocative, but it also threatened his career. Dozens of death threats were received. His tracks were dropped by radio stations. His gigs were canceled by venues. It bothered me that it bothered people, Mathis stated in a subsequent interview. He didn't find it odd because he was from San Francisco, but the rest of America thought it was too soon. He did not, however, disappear. His voice never broke, and he continued to move boldly and calmly. And he once again shone his significance in 1998, when he was 63 years old. He put out a tribute album to lyricist Diane Warren, called Because You Loved Me. The Celine Dion anthem from the movie Up Close and Personal was one of 10 of her greatest hits. The album, which was recorded at some of LA's best facilities and produced by Humberto Gatica, received 4 stars from critics, and served as a reminder that Johnny Mathis still had the ability to stop art with a single note. It was more than sentimentality, it was evidence. Johnny Mathis was still singing, still standing, and still unforgettably memorable decades after his debut. After 47 years with Columbia Records, Johnny Mathis was awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003. He started dating in 1956, and by the time he received the award, he had put out over 73 studio recordings. He rose to prominence as one of the most renowned vocalists in music history. In recognition of his career of creative accomplishment, the Recording Academy awarded him this accolade by a vote of its national trustees. He had previously received 3 inductions into the Grammy Hall of Fame, once for Chances Are in 1998, once more for Misty in 2002, and once more for It's Not for Me to Say in 2008. His greatest hits album peaked at number 1 on Billboard's albums chart for 490 consecutive weeks in 1958. That's almost a decade without losing it. He did something no one saw coming at age 81. His 79th studio album, Johnny Mathis Sings the Great New American Songbook, was published in 2017. The jazz charts took it to number 4, produced by Clive Davis and Babyface. It featured songs by Leonard Cohen, Fell, Adele, and Bruno Mars. The fact that he still had that voice astounded everybody. In addition to featuring a duet with Kenny G on Whitney Houston's Run to You, it was his first pop covers album since 1996. His performance astounded the audience during a 2015 Grammy Gala, which inspired the notion. Mathis didn't slack down until he was in his 80s. He continued to tour extensively, performing at around 50 events annually, until 2024. His Hollywood Hills home caught fire in 2015 when he was performing in Cleveland. When he later learned, he remained gracious, and stated that the fact that no one was harmed was what mattered most. He had lived in the house for 56 years. The remainder was lost, but firefighters managed to preserve what they could, including records, prizes, and even some mementos. He continued to perform, because he was one of just 5 singers to have top 40 songs in 4 decades. Supporters even started a petition in 2022 for him to be honored by the Kennedy Center. However, age eventually caught up. He declared on March 26, 2025, that he would stop performing due to deteriorating memory problems. He was 89. On May 18, 2025, he played his last show in Inglewood, New Jersey. The sold-out evening was brimming with affection and fond memories. He sang bits of How Do You Keep the Music Playing from memory as he concluded his roughly 30-song performance. Celebrities attended to observe the event. His name was added to the Bergen Performing Arts Center Walk of Fame in his honor. According to a buddy who accepted the plaque, Mathis has sold 375 million recordings worldwide. There had been signs, fans remarked in 2023, on how incredible it was that he could still recall every word. However, he required teleprompters by 2024. That year, he had started the Voice of Romance tour, but his memory problems quickly got worse. His voice was still powerful though. He continued to produce even after leaving the stage. In October 2023, he published Christmas Time Is Here, a brand new holiday album featuring 10 brand new songs. He and Kristen Chenoweth sang a duet. Despite his health issues, he continued to write new songs and published an album titled Johnny Mathis Nu Mono to stereo mixes, which included 22 remastered oldies. He was accompanied throughout those sessions by his long-standing partners, Fred Mullins and Jay Landers. Mathis had a life of survival and adversity. In 2015, his house in the Hollywood Hills burned down. And in January 2023, 8 years later, a landslide occurred on the same site due to heavy rainfall. Mud and rubble had covered a neighbor's Jaguar. Wires and pipes were ripped from the earth. Mathis was unhurt at the age of 87. He stayed despite the landslide's obvious danger to his hilltop home. Since the early 1960s, the mansion had been a part of his spirit. After rebuilding it, he decided to live there by himself with the help of a few caregivers. He never got married and dedicated the majority of his life to music. There were many mysteries and strength in his personal tale. During an interview with Us Weekly in 1982, he mentioned in passing, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." He believed this statement was off the record. No, it wasn't. It was a vicious blowback. He stopped discussing his personal life after receiving death threats. He didn't talk about himself in a CBS interview until 2017. Like most people, he admitted, "I've had some girlfriends and some boyfriends." He didn't pretend. He didn't explain much. But that simple honesty made him a quiet hero for many. His career wasn't without its dark side though, as in the 1970s, famous Dr. Max Jacobson gave Mathis injections laced with amphetamine. The shots initially helped him get over laryngitis, but they became addictive. And he also became addicted to drinking, especially champagne. One night his heart began racing, which was the tipping point. Nancy Reagan witnessed him struggling at a reception, and assisted in getting him into a rehab facility in Maryland, called the Hattgrass Center. After his first manager caused legal issues, Mathis found stability with Ray Hoffman, who remained with him until 1984. His early years in the company were filled with stressful management deals and legal issues. And there were later rumors that Nancy Lyons was controlling his personal life, but those claims don't hold up. He stayed for 3 weeks, and it saved him. After that, he managed everything himself. In 2025, he was estimated to be worth between $200 million and $400 million, with investments in fashion, restaurants, stocks, and even a football team. He also started a clothing line called Johnny Mathis Seduction. The pressure and the constant touring wore him down, but he persevered. Despite the memory loss that ended his stage career, he maintained his pleasant demeanor and continued to live independently at the age of 90 that same year. "Those are just things," he stated after the house ire. "I am quite fortunate." Johnny Mathis remained the same quiet romantic he always was, despite all the loss and the waning of the spotlight. He never behaved as though his voice had changed history. He spent over 70 years singing about love, and he knew it was time to stop when he was unable to recall every word. But for some reason, the music continued even when there was no sound.